So welcome to the smallest coffee farm in the Northern Hemisphere here at Boot Coffee Campus in San Rafael, California. And our students who come here every week, they always love to see a real coffee tree. This is an Arabica tree, and you can see it is getting ready for production. It will take another at least 4 to 5 months before these ripen. And then we will have a nano lot of coffee. But what it's really about is about the caffeine, because we of course drink coffee for this jolt. At least that's what I do, and many of my friends and family do the same. But when it comes to Arabica coffee, then you can typically find in your cup of coffee ultimately up to 2% of the chemical compounds are these caffeine compounds. Caffeine is an alkaloid. When you have a Robusta cup of coffee, then the caffeine can be double. Now, caffeine is a natural pesticide for the coffee tree. It helps the tree fight off insects or other species of trees and plants. And if you would run through a coffee farm and then you would feel your skin and basically take a taste of your hand after washing your skin, you can actually have that jolt of caffeine that way as well. You can also brew a coffee brew like they do in the western part of Ethiopia from the toasted leaves and also get that jolt of caffeine. So that's really interesting, all of this. So today I want to talk about the background of decaffeination and how is it done. And then we will do some roasting of some decaf coffee beans. So what is caffeine? It's basically a stimulant. It's an odorless white powder if you extract it from the coffee bean. It's an alkaloid. The scientist Friedrich Runge was the first scientist in the early 1800s who identified caffeine. And if you're drinking coffee, and in a regular cup of coffee, there would be between 40 to 200 milligrams of caffeine. In a cup of decaf, between 0 to 5 milligrams. And if you make an espresso, then the caffeine is quite a bit higher, between 50 to 330, 340 milligrams of caffeine, depending on how your brewing recipe is. So caffeine it acts as an indirect stimulant, but because it blocks the adenosine receptors in the brain. This substance, adenosine, is basically contributing to the tired feelings that you feel at the end of a day or when you haven't had much sleep. And these receptors that are influencing the functioning of the brain and the heart and your overall activity related to that, if you can proactively block those and influence those, like caffeine does, then you feel a lot more energetic than you would normally feel. Caffeine also, besides that it increases your alertness and well-being related to that, it also has cardiovascular effects. And it can increase your blood pressure slightly. It also has respiratory effects. So it increases the functioning of the bronchi in your lungs. And from that perspective, sometimes it's helpful to a certain degree for asthma patients. And also for athletes, it reduces the perception of exertion, of feeling exhausted during exercise. And so for endurance, it works really well. Now, if you drink way too much coffee, you could, in theory, you could kill yourself, you could die from the caffeine, but no worries, you would have to drink anywhere between 80 to 100 cups of coffee. But if I would extract this caffeine, this white powder, and absorb that by itself, then it can be very, very dangerous. Now, decaffeination methods have been in existence since quite a long time. The first scientist was Roselius, who developed the decaffeination method, and he then started a coffee company in Germany called Café Haag. In Dutch you would say Café Haag. And here in the US, this Café Haag became very relevant because this brand was bought by General Foods. And General Foods, they renamed the brand to Sanka, which is a very well-known brand still here in the US. And it's also derived from the French word sans caffeine, without caffeine. So early on, the solvents to produce decaffeinated coffee were very aggressive chemicals. One of those chemicals, which was called trichloroethylene, sounds horrible, must be a horrible chemical anyway, was banned for the reason that it caused all kinds of nasty diseases in animals. And then later on, the industry switched to more friendly, more natural decaffeination methods. In 1970s, the same company, Café Haag, they actually developed the first supercritical method using carbon dioxide gas, liquid gas. Now, some other well-known decaffeination methods they use, one is ethylene acetate, which is kind of a natural compound that can be found in citrus fruit. And it is usable for decaffeination. And basically how decaffeination then works is you have some green beans, you pour these green beans into a vessel, a large tank, you have your water with your solvent, and that can be either the ethylene acetate or methylene chloride or other more friendly ways that I will get into. And then you let it sit, you heat it up, and then you separate the beans from the liquids, and then you will ultimately filter the liquid. You will separate the compounds that determine flavor and aroma, and you will reintroduce that to the coffee. You will dry the coffee, and that will give you decaffeinated coffee. So methylene chloride is still by volume probably the most popular method in the world. The downside is methylene chloride is a very nasty substance. It's a chemical, aggressive chemical. But once you decaffeinate coffee with this and you roast the coffee, the trace elements in the coffee are negligible or not existing. But it's good to know that there are other alternatives that are both great for quality, for the coffee quality, as well as for the environment. One is this water process method, or the Swiss water process method. Swiss water decaffeination is not done in Switzerland, but it's done in Vancouver. They developed a processing style where the beans, after soaking in the natural solvent, are then separated from the solvent, and then that solvent is treated with active carbon filters, and then the beans are reintroduced to the essence of the water and the coffee oils and the aromas, and as a result of that you have a really decent or great cup of coffee. This is how the Swiss water coffee beans look like upon decaffeination and drying. There's also the mountain water decaffeination method, which is done in Mexico. Very similar process as the Swiss water method. And then as a proof of concept, actually the coffee I'm drinking right now is actually yummy. It has a really pleasant sweetness of sugar cane, kind of a toffee sweetness, has a great body, good mouthfeel, and it was selected and roasted by my good friend Andrew Barnett, owner from Linea Coffee here in San Francisco. He named this coffee, this decaf coffee, Big Calm. And then last but not least, there is also the supercritical CO2 method that was developed back in the 1970s, and there are a handful of plants around the world that use this method. It is great for quality, but very expensive because you need to bring CO2 gas to a critical state, basically to a liquid, and then under very high pressure the caffeine is extracted, and then it gives you a great end result. So I'd like to take you by the hand and do some roasting with you of some decaffeinated coffee. I have here these same beans, these Swiss water beans from Andrew Marnett, and we can use these beans kind of as a guide, as a tool, and then we will develop a roasting protocol for these decaf beans. All right, let's roast some decaf coffee. I have a Swiss water decaf coffee, Colombian origin, relatively fresh. That's important with these coffees because they do age faster. We're going to roast 6 pounds, and I have everything ready. Also, really cool, I have the new Giesen roast profiler. I'm testing the beta version, so I'm very excited to be able to use this. I hit on record and off we go. So one important tip for roasting decaf is that you should preheat your roaster as usually, but then you start your roast at a relatively low temperature because the decaffeination process, regardless whether this is with the Swiss water or the methylene chloride or with critical CO2, will make the beans more brittle, and I want to really allow the beans to get used. So I'm doing a heat soak on this coffee. So right now I'm almost 1 minute. My software tells me I'm hitting my turning point. So at this point I'm going to increase. I charged this coffee at 300 degrees Fahrenheit. And I'm now going to increase my flame, and I'm going to increase to 65% to be precise. I'm roasting 6 pounds, 6 pounds on a 6 kilo machine. 6 kilo is around 13 pounds, so I'm roasting a little bit less than the half of the maximum capacity. So I'm going to also give heat relative to that. And so with 65%, I'm going to see where my rate of rise will end up. And I'm looking now, I'm seeing a rate of rise of 14.5, which is quite good. This is the rate of rise for 30 seconds. That's the increase of the bean temperature every 30 seconds. And here on my left, I have created some space where I'm going to place each sample every minute, starting at the 3rd minute. And we will start doing that now. In the first 2-3 minutes, not too much is happening. We are now 2.5 minutes. So I'm going to place this sample here between the 2 and 3 minutes marks. And so now we're hitting 3 minutes. And in other words, I'm really gentle with my heat input in the first phase so that I can, once the Maillard reactions are close to starting, that I can increase my heat slightly in order to have a controlled Maillard reaction. So now we are at 3 minutes 30. Things seem to be going quite well. Bean temperature is 300 degrees Fahrenheit. I expect the first crack with this coffee around 370 degrees. So that means with a rate of rise of 9, we are still like a good 4 to 5 minutes away from the first crack. 4-minute milestone. I'll try to show you how these beans look like. And I can see my rate of rise curve peaked really well and it's coming down neatly. Bean temperature is now 322 degrees. So one important comment I have when it comes to decaf roasting is that the traditional change of color, as you see that during the roast with decaf, it doesn't really evolve that way because the beans already look like they have been maybe pre-roasted. That's not the case, of course, but they already have taken on a very distinct and different color. So you need to partially look very well at your thermocouple, your bean temperature thermocouple. You need to specifically, when the Maillard reactions are in full swing, you need to start smelling your coffee. And then when it comes to finalizing the roast, you need to prepare for looking well at the bean temperature. I have a color sample here of the Big Calm coffee that we discussed earlier, coffee roasted by my friend Andrew Barnett. And now we are at 350 degrees Fahrenheit bean temperature, and I'm going to decrease my bean temperature right now. And I will do it here, and I will do this specifically by bringing my power down. Oh. And so now I'm adjusting to 15% flame level because I really want to calm down my rate of rise. Now we are at 6.5 minutes. So what I was discussing, that when you're roasting decaf, you don't see the normal changes as you would expect those to see in coffee roasting, color-wise. But of course, internally, within the cellular structure, things do change, and that you can specifically notice also with the changing bean temperature. We're now at 380 degrees. This is normally where, with a normal bean that is not decaffeinated, I would have my first crack. At this point, I can assume that as internally within the beans, there is a process going on like it would happen with other coffees, normal coffees, around the first crack, but you can simply not hear the first crack. And that's often the case with decaf coffees. We're now at 7.5 minutes. And now I hear the first beginning of my first crack. Almost 8 minutes. And now I'm going to make one more adjustment with my flame level. Down to 5%. And I'm going to put my cooler stirrer arm and my cooler in the ready position. We're now 8 minutes and 20 seconds. And I'm now going to carefully compare that the color I'm seeing on my trier matches the color of Andrew's amazing decaf. And I still have a little bit to go. Rate of rise is now 2 degrees, so we're really approaching the end of this roast. Bean temperature 400 degrees at 9 minutes, just over 9. And so I'm aiming for a roast development on this decaf coffee of 18 to 20%. So I really want to go into this first crack and then slow things down. We're now 9 minutes 34 seconds. According to my screen, I'm now already at 23% development. In reality, it's a little bit lower, but now I'm going to get ready for finishing this roast. Color looks very good. And I'm going to hit stop here. The roast was finished at 402 degrees Fahrenheit. And overall roasting time was just over 10 minutes, which is great. Roast development, 22%. And obviously now I need to do some cupping with this coffee. But I think what you saw here is an example of how you can do a controlled roasting process. Next, I will take you through the bean development during this roast in specific intervals so you can see with your own eyes how I control that. Here you see on the right the decaf, Swiss water decaf that we roasted. And on the left, the roasted coffee from Linea Coffee, Andrew Barnett. The Big Calm coffee. Very nice decaf. And then here you can see some impressions of the bean development. This was right at the start. You can see at around 3 minutes, this is where the Maillard reactions really started. Now, 4 minutes, you can see now the browning of the coffee. And then we go towards the 6th and 7th minutes. 6 minutes. Now we start really smelling some coffee aroma. 7 to 8 minutes. Now we're getting further in the development. This is where I really started to reduce the gas flames. And then at 9 minutes now, it comes really down to enter in an easy way into the roast development stage. 10 minutes, we're getting ready to discharge the coffee. And then here you can see the finished coffee. So some final tips about roasting your decaf and getting the best out of your decaf program. These are important tips, by the way. Statistically, in countries like the US and also in Europe, at least 15% of what companies across the board sell is decaf coffee. So the consumption of decaf coffee is definitely there. There are a lot of millennials nowadays that are very interested in decaf coffee because they love to drink coffee late at night and not be awake all night. So decaf coffee should not be dismissed as a category that's not interesting. I take as an example this really beautiful tasting decaf coffee, the Big Calm, produced by Linea Coffee. Secondly, you can also, if you are ready to order larger batches of decaf coffee, if you have a roasting program that permits that, you can custom decaffeinate coffees for your use only. That starts usually around 70 bags of 60 kilos, or you could collaborate with other roasters in this, partner up. More and more importers, like here in the US, Royal Coffee, for example, they have good programs for and choice for decaffeinated coffees. Then when it comes to storing decaffeinated coffees, Grain Pro is a must. You should really keep air out of your green, unroasted, decaffeinated coffee beans, and you will extend the lifetime significantly. But I would recommend to maximize the holding time of your decaf coffees to 6 months, because then they really start to come down. And then when it comes to how to market decaf coffees, I recommend, take a fresh new look at this. This could be a really interesting category for your company to consider. And your brand can also thrive with a very good decaffeinated coffee. Good luck. See you next time.